Whoa. Landing an account this big will totally change my landscaping business. It's gonna mean hiring more guys and more equipment and new trucks for the new guys to drive the new equipment in. I don't know if I'm ready.
You can do this, and Ford Pro FinSimple can help. Our experts are ready to make growing pains less painful for your business with flexible financing solutions that meet the needs of your business today when you need them. Get started at fordpro.com/financing.
As the sun rose on the morning of June 8th, 2021, one of the single largest law enforcement operations in history began.
It starts in Australia, and they're breaking down doors, they're arresting bikers, drug traffickers, all of these sorts of people.
That's reporter Joseph Cox, author of the new book, Dark Wire. Police arrested more than 800 people in 16 countries in a series of raids that followed the path of the early morning sun.
Then the arrests move over as the sun moves to Europe, and they do the same thing there. They're arresting all of these weapon smugglers and hitmen and more drug traffickers as well, until eventually the sun moves to the west coast, to San Diego, and that's where the FBI and the US Attorney's Office for the Southern District of California reveals what is behind all of these arrests.
This investigation, called Operation Trojan Shield, shined a light into the shadowy industry of hardened, encrypted devices. For the first time, the FBI developed and operated its own hardened encrypted device company called Anom, A-N-O-M.
Drug smugglers, money launderers, biker gangs, and hitmen thought they were communicating securely with one another on an encrypted phone network that they all trusted. But what they didn't know was that the FBI was secretly running it all along.
These criminals thought they were hiding in the shadows. They were talking about multi-ton cocaine deals. They were talking about assassinating people who owed them drug money or their rivals. They were talking about all of their different drug smuggling techniques. And they were doing it all on this app because they thought it was encrypted. It was secure. It was out of the eyes of law enforcement. But incredibly ironically, of course, it was the complete opposite of that. And it wasn't just that, they chose maybe an app that wasn't particularly secure. All of those messages ended up with the FBI and a lot of their European counterparts as well.
Today on the show, the incredible true story of how the FBI built and ran its own phone network. The agency was wildly successful, but did it go too far? I'm Lizzie O'Leary, and you're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick around. When it comes to your finances, go for the credit card that's always there for you. With 24/7 US-based live customer service from Discover, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, that means no more waiting for, quote, normal business hours just to get a hold of someone. We're talking real service from real people whenever you need it. Get the customer service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. Get 3% daily cash back when you use Apple Card to buy a new iPhone 15 or pair of AirPods at Apple. You can choose to grow it at 4.4% annual percentage yield when you open a savings account through Apple Card. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners, subject to eligibility. Savings and Apple Card by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Member FDIC. Terms and more at applecard.com. Before I read your book, I didn't really know that there was this whole universe of encrypted phones. I mean, I use Signal, I use WhatsApp, those have end-to-end encryption on them, but there are whole platforms designed to be hidden, essentially. How do they work?
there's this entire shadow industry of highly customized and modified mobile phones that I've been covering for nearly 10 years at this point. And they work by the manufacturers will remove the microphone, the camera, the GPS functionality. They'll even include a wipe feature. So if the phone lands in the hands of law enforcement, you can tell the company, hey, quick, the cops have got my phone. It has all of my conversations about drug trafficking on there. Please, could you wipe it? And they'll do that. But then most importantly, like you said with Signal on WhatsApp, these messages are end-to-end encrypted, meaning that if the FBI or other law enforcement actually intercept those messages, it's going to be complete garbage to them. It's going to be ones and zeros and random letters.
Is it only criminals using them? I mean, is this just sort of a industry that sprang up for doing bad stuff?
Essentially, yes. Like the vast majority, as far as we know, of the customers of these companies are criminals. And, that includes this sort of complete myriad of different firms. You have Phantom Secure, EncroChat, Sky, Cypher.
They all have like movie names.
They all have movie names. They all have like weird spy games sort of branding as well. And I mean, that's actually a big part of it. The branding is that you'll look at the adverts for these companies and some of them straight up will say, we will keep your messages out of the hands of law enforcement. Now, of course, you don't have Tim Cook from Apple saying that, even though iMessage has encryption, right? And you don't really have Signal saying that either, because that would be terrible optics for that organization as well, right? And that's what is different about these companies, is that they deliberately facilitate criminal activity.
How big of a universe of platforms are we talking about?
So at its heyday, there was probably maybe half a dozen companies, something like that. And each of those would have something like tens of thousands of users. So on the smaller side, with a Phantom Secure, that's between 7 and 10,000. Then with an EncroChat, maybe you have like between 30 and 60,000, depending on the point in time. Then you'll have the juggernaut, which is Sky, and that's something like 70,000 devices. Now, that's not to say that that's every single drug trafficker in the world. You know what I mean? It's actually very, very hard to estimate how big, of course, the illicit economy is. And when law enforcement did actually get access to some of these messages, they had to triple their estimates for how much money is being made by drug traffickers, because we don't really know until we get access to the messages. But that being said, it's obviously a really sizable chunk of organized crime uses these phones. And probably more importantly, it's, for lack of a better way of putting it, the quality of organized criminals is a lot higher on these platforms. Like, these are the serious top-tier drug traffickers who are making, I mean, literally billions of dollars from smuggling cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, or whatever.
What did these phones look like, feel like? Because there were some sort of interesting user experience parts of it here. I just want to envision them.
They look like any other phone. You open it up and there's a calculator app, maybe there's a clock, whatever. But after you open the calculator and you type in a certain pin, such as 2 times 2 and then press the equals button, the calculator fades away and the Anom messaging app reveals itself, which, I know, that's some very cool Mission Impossible, James Bond sort of stuff. Security-wise, doesn't really mean much. It's actually pretty stupid. It looks sick as hell. So you have that. And then there's all of these other sorts of features as well. Like, you can type in a certain code and the phone will boot into a second operating system with a ton of dummy apps. So there'll be like a Candy Crush one and a streaming one, and then maybe a Twitter one or something like that. And these apps don't actually work. They're purely there as sort of as a facade, like window dressing. But the idea was that, well, if a police officer seizes your phone, and obviously one who doesn't know actually about Anom's big secret, they look at it and go, oh, this is an ordinary phone. It's not suspicious at all. But when it came to how they actually felt in your hand, they've really tried to be closer to consumer devices, because even drug traffickers want to take photos, they want to take videos, they want to send voice memos, and they also just want to send their emojis as well. You know, they're ordinary people chatting with their friends. It's just that their friends are trafficking cocaine.
The FBI got into the encrypted phone business after it shut down the Canadian company Phantom Secure in 2018. That left a hole in the market. which was ready for someone to exploit. And then the FBI got lucky.
So a person in and around that industry called AFGU approached the FBI with this really tantalizing offer. And I've been making my own company. I sort of wanted to spin it out and then, have it be a big company inside the industry. And it's called Anom, Anom. Would you like to take control of Anom, use it in the FBI's investigations, and then you, please, don't prosecute me or, charge me for any sorts of crimes that I may or may not done?
Give me some immunity here.
Yeah, basically, yes. And I cannot stress what an amazing ace that is that AFGU has played. Like, it's one thing to be an informant on one criminal organization. It's another to provide the FBI with access to the technical backbone to organized crime. Well, that's assuming that people will actually buy the phones, because that was very unclear at the start, right? It's like, hey, here's this company that I've sort of started making. Well, now the FBI has the problem of, we need to make a tech company for organized crime actually get popular. And that's a whole other issue.
One of the points you make in the book is that the culture of the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office is not exactly a startup, to use the dumb phrase, move fast and break things culture. The lawyers were freaked out. The FBI wasn't sure they could pull this off. How did they?
Well, this only got off the ground because it was being run by relative outsiders. One of the main prosecutors was a guy called Andrew Young, and he had done like a lot of white collar and tax law and those sorts of crimes. Through a series of kind of random events, he ends up on the Phantom Secure case and then dealing with drugs, right? So he's never prosecuted a drug case. He's not bogged down with the ordinary ideas of how you go about investigating this sort of thing. So when the Anom opportunity basically falls into the FBI's lap, he's like, we should just go for this and we should keep going until somebody tells us to stop.
Another outsider was also key to Anom's success. Bob Brewer, the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of California, a Trump political appointee with no institutional baggage.
Crucially, he was something like the first outsider in the U.S. Attorney's Office in like 20 years. Like, he hadn't been there for the past 2 decades. So he comes in, he sees this pretty wild idea to run a phone company. He's not trying to get a new job. He's 70-something. He's going to be retiring after this job. So he's like, screw it, let's go for this as well.
The technical side of this is so interesting, too, because they had real developers, back-end developers working on this, but needed, a backdoor so that they could see all the messages that these potential criminals who would be using Anom would use.
Yeah, so I spoke to developers of the Anom app, and they were ordinary Android devs working and living in various Asian countries. And one of them I spoke to would lay on his bed, open up his MacBook on his chest or his stomach, like maybe a lot of people working from home do nowadays, especially post-COVID. And he would go along and code the Anom app. And he knew about the backdoor because he was working on it. But what he was told was that, we're Anom, and we sell this app to corporations, and they need to make an archive of their messages. And that's actually very common in financial institutions or banking. It's like
anybody who might get audited.
Yes, exactly. Government as well. Like DHS uses encrypted apps, but they need to make a copy of the messages in case somebody goes and does like a really stupid or bad thing. So that's what the developer's for. Of course, in reality, it's actually being sold to criminals. And then the people selling it to the criminals in sort of a Russian doll, those nesting Russian dolls, they don't know the truth either, because ultimately the actual client of Anom is the FBI.
After the break, the FBI needed criminals to buy Anom phones. So they turned to a very specific set of influencers.
How much do you think you're paying in subscriptions every month? The answer is probably more than you think. Over 74% of people have subscriptions they've forgotten about. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. With Rocket Money, you'll have a clear view of your subscriptions, and if you see something you don't want, Rocket Money can help you cancel it with a few taps. They'll even try to negotiate lower bills for you by up to 20%. Just submit a picture of your bill, and they'll take care of the rest. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/helpmesave. That's rocketmoney.com/helpmesave. rocketmoney.com/helpmesave.
How is AI shaping human stuff? Work, relationships, culture, art? Will all of this look drastically different in the next 10 years? Some predictions are just hype, but not all of them. My name is Bilawal Sidhu, and I'm here to cut through the noise and clear AI up for you in my new podcast from the TED Audio Collective, The TED AI Show. Join me in interviewing the world's leading experts, artists, and journalists for a firsthand look and new perspective on the fast-moving world of AI. Listen anywhere you get your podcasts.
One of the things that is interesting here is that this is all focused on crimes that are taking place outside the U.S. Why outside the U.S.? Why not inside?
There are two reasons why this mostly took place outside the US. The first is that to actually get approval from the DOJ, Andrew Young and others thought that, well, they need to prove it actually works. So their partners at the Australian Federal Police, the AFP, they did something of a beta test of the Anom backdoor. Very quickly, the phone spread around Australia, and they see that 100% of the users of Anom are talking about crimes, like cocaine trafficking and everything. It's immediate. It happens straight away. Okay, that's the first thing. The second is that it is very legally complicated to do something like this in the US. Of course, there's the Fourth Amendment, which will govern search and seizure. If you don't want to use that particular legal mechanism, you turn to a wiretap, and there's all sorts of regulations, obviously, around that as well. It's actually pretty hard to get a wiretap in the US, and the prosecutors and then other people at DOJ couldn't yet find a way to do this in the US in line with the law. So at least when it started, they just focused on doing it elsewhere, and the fact of the matter is that yes, if you're on US soil, you may have a lot of legal protections. If you're outside America, you don't, basically. And I think we've seen that from the Snowden revelations, more than 10 years ago at this point. And it still applies now where the FBI can run its secret tech company and intercept messages kind of basically wherever those phones are, as long as it's not in the States, because that would actually cause them some issues as well.
The DOJ knew it was taking a risk by letting Anom phones be used for criminal purposes. Less than a decade earlier, a similar operation, codenamed Fast and Furious, had gone spectacularly wrong. Federal agents had allowed criminals to buy guns with a plan to track them. But the agents lost track of the guns. They were used in a number of crimes, and 2 ended up at the murder scene of a Border Patrol agent.
And of course, the worry was that, in that case, we in effect gave them weapons. In Anom, we're going to be giving them the technological tools that could facilitate murders. Like, isn't that just as bad? And of course, the worry was that, well, if somebody plans a murder on Anom, what are we going to do about it? And the FBI basically made a promise in that if we ever detect a threat to life, which is, we're going to kill this person, we're going to go torture them, we're going to assassinate them, whatever, they would, to the best of their ability, directly intervene or just provide the intelligence to the relevant foreign authorities so then they can mitigate that as well. That satisfied people enough that they could approve the operation and go on. But there was also another key argument in that, well, if we don't provide Anom with the backdoor to criminals, these drug traffickers are just going to use an encrypted phone from another platform. They'll go use Sky or encrypted or Cypher or whatever. Isn't it better that we seed a phone out there that we do have a backdoor into? And I mean, that's a very complicated ethical discussion.
To get Anom phones to criminals, the FBI needed their product to be appealing, something that other criminals used. AFGU, The Bureau's initial source began pushing phones out to his associates, who showed them off to their networks. Think of them as criminal influencers. One of the phones landed in the hands of an Australian kingpin named Hakan Ayek.
He is Australia's most wanted criminal. He's the head of the Aussie cartel, which is the Comancheros bikie gang, the Hells Angels, and these other criminals who would usually kill each other if they were in the same room. They come together to get something of a massive slice of all the drugs going into Australia. Now, with Hakan using the phones and advertising them, Anom takes off. Again, this is like the best marketing you could possibly hope for by having actually one of the world's most wanted criminals using and selling the phones as well.
And he has no idea who he's actually working for.
He has no idea. He thinks that he has a great business here because drug traffickers have figured out, especially in recent history, you sell your cocaine, you sell your heroin. That's very good. That's your main business. But sort of as a parallel revenue stream to that, you can also sell these phones as well. And that's not chump change. You know, that's millions, if not tens of millions of dollars from the sale of these phones. And people like Hakan and sort of the higher echelons of the Anom reseller pyramid, they allegedly did make millions of dollars selling these phones, even though they were in effect doing the FBI's dirty work for them and they had no idea.
What did the FBI and its other law enforcement partners in different countries begin to see?
Anom completely pulled back the curtain on the techniques used by organized crime, their smuggling tactics for getting drugs into countries, how they move money around the globe. I mean, really worldwide, continent-spanning money laundering operations, how they conduct hits, but also how casually they order these assassinations. And then perhaps most importantly, or at least what really blew some of the investigators away, was the sheer amount of public corruption going on. You know, people inside law enforcement agencies leaking information to criminals, people inside seaports or airports allowing the movement of drugs through those borders as well. Those are the sorts of crimes you just don't normally hear about when it comes to traditional law enforcement investigations. Those people are pretty smart or sort of isolated away from the street dealers or the people actually touching the drugs. But Anom allows the FBI and its counterparts a view into that world, and it really did blow some of the investigators away to the point where they didn't even loop in some countries into the secret of Anom's back door because they were like, the corruption here is just too bad. We're literally not even going to tell them until the operation is over.
One of the things that is so interesting and tricky about this story is where the FBI and their law enforcement partners drew the line between letting some of these crimes play out and gathering the evidence of them and intervening. This is a very fuzzy moral area.
It's the most complicated trolley problem I can possibly think of, but they had to do it, not even like once a day, multiple times a day. They're like fretting over, oh my God, do we intervene and grab the drug shipment? Because obviously we want to stop these drugs and stop harm coming from them. But if we do that, maybe the criminals will start suspecting the phones. And it's this constant tension throughout the entire operation. And they kind of did it on an ad hoc basis. It would be like, well, this shipment's just really large. This is like tons and tons of cocaine. We really need to stop this. And in other ones, they just let it happen, you know. And even sometimes when the FBI did intervene and they did warn authorities about an impending threat to life or some sort of other physical violence, the crime sometimes still happened. There's a case in there where the FBI watches a firebombing be planned and then sort of be executed all the way through. They still tell the relevant authorities, but the bombing still happens. And I can't really imagine what it would be like to be in that position, just seeing a crime play out in front of you, and you've kind of done what you can, and then it still happens. I don't know, it's just these incredibly complicated ethical decisions multiple times a day for these agents.
A man was murdered, at least one.
Yeah, so the FBI says it intervened in around 150 threats to life. They announced this at the press conference themselves. But what I found by investigating the operation is that at least one person did die because their murder was planned on Anom. There was a young guy in Sweden called Sasha, connected to a life of crime, and everything about his murder is on Anom. There's sourcing the weapon, there's sending photos of the target between the different assassins, there's luring Sasha to a particular bridge in Sweden as well, and then there's even the people gloating about the murder afterwards, typing ha 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 into the chats as well, and that's all stored on an FBI hard drive somewhere in San Diego. And I spoke to Swedish officials about this, and they actually came to call that event the bridge, because it was a constant reminder of the stakes of Anom. Like they knew and realized they have to act whenever they see something like this come up.
You also note how quickly the app grew, how many criminals and criminal syndicates were using it. Do you think it's fair to lay some of these crimes at the feet of the FBI because Anom grew so fast?
So after Anom starts in Australia, it spreads to Europe, and then stuff really takes off. It expands into South America and then goes into Southeast Asia. There's even a push to get the phones into Russia as well. And at some point, the FBI has something like 22 million messages, 1 million messages every single day, hundreds of criminal syndicates joining the platform in totality, and more coming onto the platform every single day. I absolutely think that the size of the data collection became a problem for the FBI. It became very, very difficult to maintain tempo, to keep momentum with the amount of intelligence that was coming in. And I mean, that's ultimately why they had to shutter it, because it was just becoming too much to handle.
How did they decide to pull the plug?
So there's a couple of reasons why they decided, or when they decided to pull the plug. The first is that they always wanted to do that. It wasn't just a way to arrest criminals. What the FBI wanted to do was shatter criminals' trust in the encrypted phone industry. They wanted to run this company, intercept all of these messages, and then come out one day and be like, look, guys, it was us the entire time. How could you possibly trust any of these other phone companies now? And the hope was that, well, the criminals would realize, well, we can't trust those anymore. Let's go back to face-to-face meetings, or maybe we'll use normal phones or social media or something, techniques that the FBI could actually more easily monitor. The second is that the court order from one of the countries that was intercepting the messages, that was going to expire. Theoretically, they could have just got another one and kept going. And the FBI's foreign counterparts wanted this operation to keep going. But it was then the final reason that they really pulled the plug is that the FBI just could not handle this anymore. They had a rotating cast of 130 agents, 30 or 40 agents at a time spread across different rooms. They had all of these other agencies in Europol and around the world looking through the data, but it just wasn't enough. Anom was becoming too successful. It had hockey stick growth, and it's almost like the FBI was just too good at this. They actually made a company that rivaled the quote-unquote real criminal companies.
On the one hand, the story is astonishing in terms of how they pulled this off. The fact that they were so successful and were able to move the phones to so many different criminal networks. On the other, it has given me real pause thinking about the security and privacy of the messaging platforms that I use as a journalist on a daily basis, that other people use. What has it made you come away from this reporting process thinking about?
So I don't think the FBI is just going to go home and hand in their badges and say, okay, job well done. We did that big operation. What they're going to do is find the next iteration of Anom. They actually said as much. I snuck into a law enforcement conference where some of these FBI agents were speaking, and one of them said, we look forward to the next version of this operation. Now, since Anom, I've spoken to drug traffickers and to people who sell these phones, and they say that some people are so paranoid, they're just moving to Signal or other consumer platforms, which probably would have been much better for their security in the first place if they just use Signal like the rest of us, because it's a very, very good app. But that brings up a key question, which is, well, what is the FBI or other authorities going to do when more of the criminals do move to Signal or Telegram or WhatsApp or whatever. So Matthew Green, a cryptographer, he brings up a really interesting thought experiment at the end of my book, which is like, what is the split for the FBI? Is it, if 90% of the people are hardened criminals, or 10% are lesser criminals, is that okay to compromise the whole network? Or is it 50-50? He doesn't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. But it's more, what is the FBI or its partners willing to do now? And will that compromise potentially the security of all of our communications? We just don't know. But that is absolutely the warning shot that I think Anom presents.
This may be an unfair question, given that you've spent years thinking about this. What do you think the legacy of Anom is?
I think the legacy of Anom is that, most of all, it shows the extreme lengths that the FBI or other agencies are willing to go to get into encrypted communications. Other agencies have hacked into these encrypted phone companies. The FBI has shut them down. I genuinely never thought the FBI would run its own encrypted phone company. When I learned about that at the same time as everybody else, I was floored. Like, I did not see this coming whatsoever. Then I took after my initial shock, I stood back a bit and I was like, it doesn't make perfect sense. But I'm so surprised they went and did it. If they're willing to run their own tech company for organized crime, I think basically anything is possible at this point. That is the main legacy of Anom, is that anything is on the table when it comes to beating encryption.
Joseph Cox, thank you so much for your reporting and for this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Joseph Cox is an investigative reporter for 404 Media and the author of the book Dark Wire, the incredible true story of the largest sting operation ever. It's out now. And that is it for our show today. What Next TBD is produced by Evan Campbell, Patrick Fort, and Shayna Roth. Our show is edited by Paige Osborne. Alicia Montgomery is Vice President of Audio for Slate, and TBD is part of the larger What Next family. And if you like what we are doing here, the single best thing you can do to support our show is to join Slate Plus. Just head on over to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. All right, we'll be back next week with more episodes. I'm Lizzie O'Leary. Thanks for listening.